So, Steve, please tell us all about yourself, like who you are, what you
All
like
I
to.
want, all I want to know is why do they call you Doctrine Man? That's my thing.
There you
Like if
go.
if we can
There
get
you
to
go.
that, I think we'll
So we
Doctrine
spend.
can,
Man.
yeah, we
Yeah.
can. I was a career Army officer. I spent 28 years in the Army, retired in 2015, and have been at the University of Kansas School of Business for the last 10 years, give or take, so 9 years plus. Um, I was an Army logistician for about half of that time in the Army. The other half, I was a strategist and a communicator. Doctrine Man, I'll answer your question right up front, Julia. Doctrine Man grew out of that. And I did a podcast with a group called, oh Lord, what are they? I don't want to say Compound W, but it's because I guess the W in my head, it was a warrant officer school podcast, and they're going to hate me for not getting this right. Cohort W, that's what it is. I knew I started with a C. Uh, and we talked about the founding of Doctrine Man, and that it grew out of, I was coming out of a particularly frustrating and anger-inducing period in my career. And I used that energy as fuel to do something creative. And so I created an online comic that was also basically a discussion board, a community where people could just come in and we could share news and talk about what was going on in the world, focusing on things that related to us and did different things. And I ran that for about 16 years.
Oh,
And
I
that's
remember that. I remember that. I mean, I
yeah.
was not involved in it, but I remember hearing about it on the margins.
Yeah, it was something that I thought existed on the margins fairly well. When I hung it up, I had about 300,000 followers. So, nothing like today's influencers, obviously, but for somebody from our generation, I thought that's pretty respectable, right?
that's a big number.
That's a big number. And I didn't realize until I really took it down just what an influence it had on people. And it was a very positive influence. I had a lot of messages from people who said, "Hey, this made a huge difference at a critical time in my life or in my career," um, and it had great personal meaning to people, which is what you really hope to do in life. Is if you can make a difference in the world, hey, great, right? And that was my opportunity to do something that honestly grew out of something that was largely negative, the negative emotions, the anger, the frustration, and was channeled into something positive, which made a great podcast discussion on just how we can use negative emotions in a positive way. We don't have to use those just to perpetuate negativity, that we can transform those things into a much better and more fruitful way of doing things.
Wow. So by taking people out of their day to day and creating this comic, which was sort of like a reflection of the world, but not actually their world, you were able to get them to sort of put themselves in a new perspective that allowed them to
Yeah,
turn.
in a lot of ways. And the comic was relatable because it usually dealt with things that they saw on a daily basis anyway. And they grew out of something that I would experience. I would keep a notebook of ideas and then sketch them out in PowerPoint, because that was part of the joke. Was they were all PowerPoint comics, and PowerPoint is ubiquitous in the armed forces. So I had to do something that just uh translated that silliness of PowerPoint into something fun, but they could relate to it. And now I take those comics once a week and I'll post one onto LinkedIn and then tell the story behind it, because every
Oh,
one of them
nice.
has a story.
Yeah.
And I know the stories, but I don't share the stories very often. And so that's been something that I started to do when I finished the comic was, hey, let me tell you about last week, for example, I did a comic that I would do every so often. About every 6 months, I'd have a comic of one of the characters with a little kid on his lap. And that little kid was supposed to be my oldest son, who's now 36. Um, but we would read, we would tell stories at night, do the parental things. And there was a particular comic that dealt with Curious George, and the dad is telling the story of Curious George and the land of extraordinary rendition, where special forces come and take away the man with the yellow hat, And what it was, I used to make stories up for my kid. I would never read the kids the actual stories half the time. I would just drive off, tell some crazy story, and they would get annoyed because they were smart enough to know the stories and, well, go get mom. Mom reads the stories right. You don't do this right. And tell that, again, this is where Curious George's adventures came from in that comic, was they were things that I made up for my kids. And every comic has a story like that behind it, that, it's not just I just sat down and thought, hey, this might be funny. It's a real life experience.
Right.
And I think it's something that specifically, as parents, I mean, we don't always just read what's in the lines of the book. We make things up.
Answer
We,
questions that kids come up with, and
yeah,
then that leads
right.
to a new
Exactly.
story.
It's never
Yeah.
just, let's just read a book and lay down. It's like, okay, we're going to go into some things and do some different stuff. And it makes it memorable for them.
Yeah.
That's
Develop
funny.
them.
I know I never had kids, but I have friends whose kids I'm very close to now, the grandkids. And I was over at their house with the grandkids, and I was reading them a Thomas the Tank Engine book. And my take is, who the hell writes these Thomas the Tank Engine books? Because they're absurd. They're totally unintelligible. They're about narrow gauge and this gauge, and So I'm dutifully reading the book, and then I report to the grandma, my friend. God, those Thomas the Tank Engine books—they're ridiculous. And she goes, "Did you actually read it? I never read them, the text. I just make up a story about the pictures."
That's
And I
right.
was like, "Oh, yeah."
Oh my God. My oldest grew up on Thomas the Tank Engine,
Uh-huh.
and we have just as many stories of, he would have the little toys and he would hoard them so no one would touch his Thomas the Tank Engine toys. It's just silly kid stuff, right? Oh, don't
Right.
touch my tank, or don't touch my
Yeah.
trains. But you're right, they were always silly. And so it's somebody British who writes those, obviously. So you get that different flavor of literature, but also that you weave in the weirdness that, like Carmen said, narrow gauge, standard gauge, switching. Like, so you got to know something about trains to be able to write this stuff.
Yeah.
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 I don't know. It's interesting.
Well,
So,
I'm very curious about the no one touch my trains thing, because I feel like that, as people get older, can sort of seep its way into our adult life and
oh God,
behavior.
yeah, yeah.
And I'm curious if you ever made fun of that kind of controlling behavior in your Doctrine Man
Oh, it's hard
comics.
not to, because so much of what I dealt with was leadership related, and not just adult stuff, but leadership coming from an institution where you pride yourself on your ability to develop and grow leaders. Uh, we have an awful lot of dysfunctional leaders, what the Army likes to call counterproductive leaders. We used to call that toxic back, 10 years ago. Now they're just counterproductive, so we don't make them feel bad about how horrible they are as individuals. Uh, uh,
Which may be
but
counterproductive in itself.
that behavior doesn't just start. That's behavior that starts at a certain age and manifests itself well over time. And then, oh my God, we're going to give you 100 people to work for you, and none of them can touch your trains. And uh, you've always had everything your way, so you can't cede control to anybody else.
It's,
You
it's
see
so the
all of,
100 people are worthless on the team.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, we had a conversation just this weekend. I was talking with a couple of colleagues, and we were talking about people who aspire to be leaders in our world, but yet they lack. Say they don't engage. They don't like to leave their office. They prefer to just like stay away from other people. Well, how do you lead people if you avoid them? I want to lead people. I just don't want to see them. Like, how does that even work? Where does your mind go that you think that's okay? And I was writing something, and one of my editors said, well, something about, well, people with self-reflection, this will mean a lot. I said, people that have self-reflection read these things. People who don't possess self-reflection don't read these articles, so they're
Exactly.
meaningless. All they are is they validate our feelings about others. Oh yeah, I can see so and so in this, or I understand this, but yeah, but the people who need to read them, they don't read them because they don't need to change. They're fine. Just ask them; they'll tell you.
Right.
They're great. Don't touch my trains. Everything's cool.
So I'm gonna push back a little bit on your use of the verb lead, because I
Oh
was
yeah,
in
Carmen
a,
doesn't like this word, by the way.
I am, well, that's, it's kind of a cliche, it's my own cliche. But I had positions that involved responsibility for lots of people in my career. And the more I was in them, the more I just hated all the tropes around leadership, just all of them. And so I kept wanting to do the things that were my responsibility without ever doing any of the typical stuff, good or bad, that leaders are supposed to do. So I even had an employee, this was in my first leadership position as a team chief. I had an employee come to say to me, Carmen, you need to act more like a leader. You're not acting like a leader. So one, he felt comfortable enough to say this to me. But two, even then, I tried very hard to not fall into what I considered to be kind of a trap that distanced you from people and created just unnecessary boundaries and walls. So how do you react to that?
I don't disagree. I think that's what you said just really resonates because how do you act like a leader? I mean, we lead with our values, we lead with our character, but we should be genuine to ourselves. And I have heard that a million times. I would tell people that at every rank I held in the army, at some point, someone told me I would never get promoted again because I didn't act right.
Mm-hmm.
And it was always, it's the way you act. You don't act like an officer. You don't act, but I was me and I wasn't going to be anybody. I'm unapologetically me. I'm going to be me. And if you don't like that, the hell with you. I don't care. I got to be me because if I'm not me, then I'm not true to who I am. And then it's just an act and I'm not going to act and I'm going to do the things that I need to do. I don't worry so much about the tropes that surround, you know, should we lead by example? Yeah, lead by example. Be a values driven, ethical individual. But we should all be that, whether we're in leadership positions or not. And I think that's something that people forget is that when you really talk about, when we talk about the tropes of leadership, those are just things that you should do anyway, regardless of whether you're supporting people in leadership positions, whether you're in a leadership position, whether you're just off doing your own thing. You ought to be able to set the example. You ought to be able to be a good human being. You ought to be able to lead with character and values. You ought to be able to be transparent and engaging and all the things that you want out of a human being. That's what you want out of a leader. Somebody who is fair and equitable and looks out for the benefit of others. And this is an interesting thing. It's something I do that I have taken criticism from, even since I came to the university. And I don't really care. I love criticism. Um, but one of the first things I will do when I hire a new employee is I will sit them down. I give them a copy of James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, and then say, all right, I want you to read this book. Come back in a month, and then let's talk about what your next job is going to be. And then let's start setting goals and let's make sure that you're on a trajectory for that next job. Because I don't expect you to be in this job forever. I want to help you find your next job and I want to help grow you into that position. And that's usually met with just this odd look of why would you want to do that? Because if I'm supposed to lead you, then this is what I need to do is I need to help you grow and develop into who you want to be and to meet your own goals, but you've got to have those goals. We want to talk about those goals and it becomes a much different conversation at that point. That's leadership, I think, in my mind. That it's not like, hey, Carmen, I want you to be in this job for the next 20 years. We're not going to give you a pay raise more than once every 5 years. It's not going to be enough to buy bread. But hey, let's just be happy. And then we're going to surround you with toxic positivity. We're going to smile at you all the time and ask you how you're doing when we really don't care. We just don't want you to leave. Well, I can't do that to people. How can I help you get to where you want to be in life? And if you don't know where you want to be, how can I help you figure that out? And help you figure that out, because you're going to be the one to figure it out. But we have a lot of those kinds of developmental conversations. And that's the part of leadership that I think is important that we really miss out on. And I wish we had a trope for that. That,
We do.
hey,
Let's
you
make one
really
up.
should be growing people,
We'll
because
make
it's
one up right
antithetical
now.
to a lot of leaders.
People talk about servant leadership, and I think we should talk about gardener leadership. Because what you're describing is like
Carmen, can you hear her?
Yes. Are you having trouble hearing her?
I can't hear anybody now. I apologize for that. It's
No,
it's
not at
on my
all.
end. Sometimes I think my computer, does what it does.
all
Sorry.
right. So you can hear us now.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's
Oh,
okay.
that's fine. You were saying
We
we
were going to
need a new
invent a
trope.
new trope.
Yeah. And I was thinking we could do that right here. And the one that came to mind for I loved what you described. I think it's perfect. I think that's what leadership is. And I want to call it, instead of the servant leadership model, I want to call it the gardener leadership model. Like,
It works.
right?
Planting seeds. Yeah. I
And
use
you're
that
tending
metaphor
to
a
them.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're noticing the difference between what each different kind of seed needs, because not all the seeds are the same and they need different things. Yeah.
That's perfect.
I
Yeah.
was out there this
Yeah.
morning trimming my tomatoes, which are just suffering in this, heat that's excessive for them. And I reflected on the fact that gardening is a great teacher of uncertainty
Yeah.
and unpredictability, that you just are never really sure what's going to happen. And, you learn to accept that. And you learn to accept failure too as a gardener. And I think those are all great outcomes and learnings from gardening.
That's
That's what,
really interesting.
that's what makes it such a great metaphor,
Yeah.
because what you just said, Carmen, can you be comfortable with the uncertainty and the ambiguity of the task? You put forth the effort. Sometimes you get what you want. Maybe most of the times you get what you want, but you can't control everything. You can only control what's within your um, within your ability to control. You can't control the environment. You can't control the weather. You do your best. That, as somebody who teaches strategy, this is something that I teach my students, that um, you don't know where life is going to take you. So what you want to do is be flexible enough and adaptable enough that you can kind of carve out your own path, and you can maneuver where you need to go when you need to go there. But there's no one set path from beginning to end. You need to be flexible enough to find a way to get there. But that all deals with the uncertainty and the ambiguity, the failure. And it's okay to fail. Teaching people it's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes. That's a huge one. But that's a trope that we use, that it's easy to say and it's harder to do. When we
Right.
say, well, I underwrite failure. Well, tell me what you really mean. How do you underwrite failure? Well, I don't blame them the first time. It's like, yeah, but you know, and I used to deal with this when I was the chief of operations at Fort Leavenworth. I had people who worked for me who routinely made mistakes, and I had one guy who couldn't stand the fact that I wouldn't discipline people when they made mistakes. It's an honest mistake. I'm not going to get angry. I don't yell. Like, okay, what do we do to fix this? Doesn't why waste the energy getting angry when you're just going to have to fix it anyway? So let's focus that energy towards a solution and not worry about it. Okay, what did you learn? Let's not make that mistake twice. Let's move on. Unless you make a habit of making mistakes, some people do, uh, most people don't. So, it's okay to fail. And it's not, what is it, they say, it's not that you fell down, it's that you picked yourself back up and you kept
Right.
going.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And I also think that we have so much anxiety about the reality that we are living and working in a complex system that we can't possibly understand, that we like to foreclose on that because it can make us so anxious, because we're really secretly, even if not consciously, we're secretly aware that we don't have control, right? And
Oh, yeah.
so we go straight to, oh, we're going to solve this with some kind of control mechanism, which is a fantasy, but it allows us to back off of our anxiety, to reduce our anxiety. The thing is, there's no evidence that that makes people fail less, right? So you still have the lack of control, you still have the complex system, but now you've shut yourself off to any recognition of the reality, and you're more likely to blame people for failure or not support failure actually as part of the process of trying to understand how to navigate in such a complex system. So I think
I love this topic because one of the things I do, I don't know when I started it, but every single one of my classes, I give students the opportunity to journal. And it's really interesting, especially at the undergraduate level, that the students tend to use that as a vehicle to talk about their anxieties with me. And it's all private. Nothing's ever said, but it leads to different discussions. I absolutely find it fascinating that I don't want to be generational in this, but this generation, I deal with 20, 21, 22-year-old kids who don't know how to deal with anxiety. Well, I'm on a medication. Okay, that's great, but how do you actually deal with it?
yeah,
How do you contend with it? I give away a lot of those Ryan Holiday stoicism books to students. Hey, it's okay to face obstacles. The obstacles are a part of life. Yes, it's okay to feel anxious about those obstacles, but you're going to have to contend with those obstacles at some point. So get it out of the way. Face the obstacle down. Once you get past that obstacle, then the anxiety is going to really start to fade, and you're going to realize, hey, I did it. And if you failed, so what? Pick yourself up and try again. Just keep going. Eventually, you're going to get through. Um, it's it's less of an indictment on parenting, but I don't feel like a lot of these kids have been taught to deal with anxieties in the same way we were. And I'm
100%.
an old guy, but it's okay to skin your knee. Just get back on your bike and keep going. We're not going to throw your bike away because you fell off of it once. But we do that. We do. Well, I don't want to ride the bike anymore. Okay, we'll put it out with the trash and you don't have to worry about riding a bike anymore. No, we're going to keep doing this and I'm going
Do
to help
people
you.
really do that? Is that a thing, or is that a fantasy
Yes.
that's a thing?
No, it's a
That's a
thing.
thing?
It's a
Huh.
thing.
That
I've seen
seems,
it myself.
yeah,
I
yeah.
won't say who I've seen, but I've seen people very close to me say, well, he didn't like to ride. He had a wreck and now he doesn't want to ride his bike. So we're just going to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Like take him outside and make him do it again. He says it's too hot. It's 80 degrees. Go outside, play outside. No video games today. Just go outside, get some sun, get some light, live outside. But then these
This
kids,
sounds like a Gen X conversation.
oh, it is. And it's a frustrating conversation. But when I was getting back to that point is in these journals, I see this all the time where students are finally realizing, hey, I'm going to graduate in a year. I haven't been out of school in 16 years. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I need somebody to talk to. I went to the clinic. They gave me this medicine. You don't need a medicine. You need to make sure that you're prepared and know that it's okay. And we'll help you get to that next step. That's part of what we do is we help prepare you for that future. It'll be okay. But it's fascinating how much anxiety there is out there.
So I have
yes.
sorry, I have two questions. One, is there a COVID effect on this generation that you're teaching? So curious because you're right there and observing it. And my second question is really more like a comment. I feel like people have lost the patience maybe or grit or resilience to actually get to the other side of whatever problem they are. All difficulties become obstacles that are for some reason not surmountable when they're really just things that they're like little puzzles and you have to get to the other side where there will be a new puzzle awaiting you, but nevertheless
Yes,
life is the levels that you go through.
right.
So to answer your first question, yeah, there is how it manifests itself, I think is still to be seen. What I've seen is that you take these kids and they basically lost a year and a half, 2 years of the most formative time of their lives. Um, for us, it's not that huge a deal. Okay, I had to wear a mask to go to the grocery store. I really didn't care. I was home. I loved it. I hung out with the dogs all the time. No big deal. But I wasn't 18 years old.
Right.
Um, but there's a flip side to this that I find more interesting is that what we see in academia is there was a trend there for a couple of years to just give out A's. We're not going to push you. We're just going to give you a grade and push you forward. And what that does is then you have students that show up not as well prepared because they haven't done those puzzles, like you said, Carmen. They didn't do the puzzles. They were allowed to bypass the puzzles, but the puzzles still exist. And so you find yourself having to go back and do some foundational teaching to reestablish things that they should have known. Um, uh, and it, I get it. It was a hard time, but you owed it to these kids to do right by them, to give them the puzzles and make them work through the puzzles and figure it out. Not everybody did it that way, but there's enough there that, we talk about this on a fairly frequent basis, looking at grade distribution trends, for example, over time, and that certain foundational courses, the grade distributions went from, 25% A's, 30% B's to 80% A's for a couple of years. And then they kind of tended to stay there. Hey, this is really easy. I just give the students A's, but it creates a problem downstream because then students aren't as well prepared. The resilience and the grit, Carmen, that goes back to that whole not allowing people to face those puzzles. And I've thought about this an awful lot, both as a parent and as a grandparent. I had a good example. My father was an Army Corps of Engineers civilian for 35 years, but he was a product of the Great Depression. Typical product. Grew up in a 2-bedroom house with a dirt floor. They had no money. He was a first-generation college student. He only went to college by joining the Navy, serving in the Korean War, using the GI Bill. Hard work. And if I ever went to my dad with a problem, my dad's response was figure it out. Like, how do I do this, Dad? Figure it out. He taught me algebra in 4th grade, sat me down and made me learn algebra so I could do 4th grade story problems. And for a 4th grader, algebra was out there, right? That's years away, but that was my dad. He was like, you're going to learn this. You're going to figure this out. I'm not going to solve that problem for you. You're going to solve it. Now, there's goodness there. I agree with part of that. I don't mind giving some guidance. Hey, look, try this, look at this, but you're going to have to solve the problem. I think we have gotten to a point where it's easier for some people to just solve other people's problems rather than let the people solve their problems themselves. I'll build that puzzle for you. You just watch. Well, that doesn't help anybody. You need people to build their own puzzles because life, like Carmen said, it's one puzzle after another. And so you might as well figure that out. You don't help anybody by solving their puzzles for them, but we like to do that anyway.
And in the end, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, and at the end, Carmen, you wanted to summarize.
Well, and in the end, the real thing that you learn is not how to solve any particular puzzle, but the general protocol and technique
Amen.
And how
for
to deal with
solving puzzles.
Yes.
Which is another way of saying for dealing with uncertainty.
Yes.
Right.
And dealing with your own anxiety.
That's all. And your own anxiety. That's all the same thing. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But the story with your father, one thing that we don't talk about that's very much there is that you're in connection with your father. You have a relationship with your father. So while he's saying, go figure it out, he's saying, go figure it out. He's not ignoring you. He's not saying, oh, it's not a problem. He's saying, yeah, it's a problem, right? Which is huge. Go figure it out. And he has also saying he has faith in you to figure it out, right? So
I don't know if he had faith in me.
Well, no, because he wouldn't have said, go figure it out if he knew you had a disability where like you know, the problem was to walk to the door and you didn't have legs, right? So like he believed that you had the capacity to solve the problem. And that's such a big deal. And I feel like that piece we don't talk about as much, but that's also a piece that fell off with COVID, is there was sort of a just complete anxiety among the adults and the teachers and the parents of these kids that they're not going to make it through. We're going to have to help them solve the problem. You know, we're going to deal with our own anxiety by pushing it on the kids and saying, you can't possibly do this. We're just giving you an A, which then makes them think I'm a fragile flower. I can't possibly do this. Just give me an A.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh boy, there's a lot to unpack there, but you're absolutely right. Yeah. That's, I see that all the time. And I struggle with that, uh, because I don't want to come across as harsh or not caring. But at a certain point, you deal with some frustration there because it's the unwillingness to go solve their own puzzles. I just want you to solve this for me. That's not going to happen. Well, I tried and I quit. Well, okay, well, that's a failing grade. I and then how could, so here's an example. So I had a group case study due in an online strategy class this summer, an undergraduate class, and there were two students who didn't participate with their groups. And it was acknowledged because we do peer reviews. So all the other students were like, hey, these guys didn't show up, they didn't contribute. So I gave them zeros. And I'd had a conversation with the guys. So they acknowledged they didn't show up. They got zeros. And then one of them came back and said, why did I get a zero? Are you kidding me? It's zero because you didn't contribute. Yeah, but I'm part of the team. Well, I think you should ask the others how they felt because they don't feel like you're part of the team and you need to pick up. Well, that's 10% of my grade. Like, that's your
Oh,
problem. You
yeah.
needed to think about that going into, you made a choice and there's consequences attached to that choice. And I know what'll happen is at the end of the semester, I'll get a lousy student review from the guy, but it's okay. You get when you can always tell who gets C's and below because they give the worst evaluations. But it's just part of the job. But hey, that's something that we don't like to do either is, okay, here are the consequences to that choice. And let's
Yeah.
explain, you tell me why you made that choice. Well, I had other stuff to do. I was playing video games. I took a vacation. Okay, but you let four people down and made them do your work because you weren't around. And then you're angry because you didn't get a grade. Well, do you see the
But
disconnect?
but you're showing to the students the grace of saying, I believe that you could act otherwise,
Mhm.
right? That's
That's hard to do sometimes though.
yeah.
Because there's times when the dad side of me wants to come out and say, "Hey, look, you dumb shit. This is on you. You did this." But you extend a little more grace and hopefully a little more constructive criticism and push them in the right direction. Yeah, yeah.
What do you think we can do with adults? I mean, we're, you know, as you and I are both Gen Xers, so we're used to complaining about,
Well,
Gen Zers, but what can we do with adults to help?
if I can just inject something
Yes.
there. So Julia, you wrote something on LinkedIn today about the sort of emotional and cognitive state of our country. And when we started talking about Doctrine Man and how you felt that was helpful, I thought about what you had written on LinkedIn. And so we have a lot of emotional uncertainty and a lot of anxiety in the country right now. And I was thinking, well, maybe we need some kind of cartoon for our country that
Yeah.
helps people work through these issues in more constructive ways.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. Looks like you might be looking at what you wrote there.
Oh, I
If
can briefly summarize.
yeah, why don't you summarize it? What did you have to say?
Yeah, so so we're recording this couple days after, 2 days after the assassination attempt
On
against
on President Trump, yes.
And I've noticed, talking to my friends and family, I've noticed that there's a desire to get into that sort of self-righteous I hate it. It's this self-righteous, I know what's correct. So I know the answer to the story. I know the answer to the puzzle. I know what's correct. To foreshorten the time during which you are anxious because you realize you don't know what's going on and it's a complex situation. And to cut that short and to say, I know what's correct. And then I get a dopamine burst that says, oh, it doesn't feel good to know that you're right and other people are wrong. And I think we can actually, it occurred to me that I think we can get addicted to the dopamine burst, just like
Oh,
any other
absolutely.
dopamine burst. And in fact, we go through withdrawal in these very complex and emotional situations because we're like, we actually know that we can't get to a simple solution quickly and we're looking for our fix. So we're scrolling and we're like, what's our fix? What's the answer? How can we get to certainty? How can we get that self-righteousness back again? But sort of what our country needs is to go through a sobriety program in which we realize we have to be sober around the reality that we don't know what's correct. The situation is complex. About 50% of the people in the country believe that this person represents their views, and about 50% believe that this other person represents their views, and that's the situation. So how could it be that that one side is all right and one side is all wrong? That's just like, doesn't even make sense. It's too simple. And so getting to sobriety around our own addiction to being right, I think is really important. And so I just talked a little bit about how love can transcend that. So that's what that post was about.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm just soaking all that in because that intersects with a lot of different areas that I write about and talk about. Um, I'm overwhelmed right now because I'm thinking it's like the mind starts to spin immediately, right? Um, so this, how do you get people? How do you teach people to think critically, question what they see, and then turn that into something useful for everybody else? And I think we struggle with that. You're right. Everybody's right. And then I've never thought about it from the idea of the dopamine fix, but it makes sense because you always know those people who are always right. They've never been wrong and they have to be right. And what drives that is the dopamine. That's a thought. I never thought about that. It actually would make me feel better about some people that I get really annoyed with who are like that. And I could say, okay, well, you have an addiction problem. It's not that not that you have to be right all the time or you're a control freak. You're addicted to dopamine. I like that. That's a much better way to have that conversation. The other piece of that is how many adults lack the ability to think critically these days? Um, and they just stop short of it. I spend an awful lot of time on critical thinking, probably from the outset. This is a discussion that we've had on faculty levels. How do you teach people to think critically? Well, you put stuff in front of them and they start asking questions. Okay, you brought that article to class. Why did you bring that article to class? Well, it was written by somebody. How do you know they're credible? What gives their ideas validity? And then well, give me a case. Defend this individual's not just the points, but who they are and what they say. The next time you bring me a Tucker Carlson article, yeah, I saw Tucker Carlson talk. Oh, great. Okay, don't. Let's put this back in the box. Why do you think there's a credible individual and not just a whack job? But as a society, we just lack that ability. I was looking through X yesterday, and I made the mistake of looking at X. I only did it for 5 minutes, and my wife said, "You're gritting your teeth. What are you doing?" And I said, "I was just reading all the conspiracy theory nonsense over the assassination attempt, and it was just insane." It's like, but then people believe what they read, and it's like, but there's no proof that this was space Nazis from the dark side of the moon. But yet you got all these people who agree with you. Like, what's wrong with you?
But that's also being right. But so that's
Oh, and they're
right.
right. Yeah, they're right too. It's like I don't understand how you get there. I had a flat
No, I mean, what
earther
I mean is,
class this year
what
too.
I mean is saying that other people are conspiracy thinkers and that what's true is also about being right. And so it's like we have to be very careful
Ah,
because everyone's trying to deal with the anxiety of not knowing what's going on. And they're solving it in different ways. And some people solve it and say, we have to have more critical thinking, and you people aren't thinking critically, which is another dopamine hit of I'm right. And then there's the people who say, I know it's a conspiracy, which is another dopamine hit. And so it's the sobriety is about realizing no one freaking knows. And
Yeah.
it's complex.
You know how
From my
sobriety works in like AA, for example, you know, just what I've heard, but the whole point of alcoholics is that they have to withdraw completely, right? You can't, you know, most people who have had an alcohol or any kind of addiction problem in their life are never able to just use it under control. They have to completely withdraw. And I think about that in terms of my own behavior. So I was visiting with a friend last week in North Carolina, someone I spent a lot of my career with. And he said, well, President Biden's going to give a press conference tomorrow and I have to watch it. And I go, why? Why do you have to watch it? And he goes, well, don't you want to watch it? And I go, no, I have no interest in it. And I purposefully don't, and I'm being very truthful. I purposefully do not watch any of those. I haven't seen the debate. I didn't see whatever he said last night. I didn't see the press conference. And that's my response to what I think contributes to this anxiety and drunkenness is that we've all become, it's like it's become a sport that
Yes.
we must watch.
Yeah, it's a news junkie situation.
And I'm just like, I'm just not going to be there anymore.
Yeah.
And I probably was there 10 years ago, but in this intervening time, I have withdrawn from that. And again, here's my dopamine rush about being right. I feel that it's really healthy for me. And I'm happy that I have withdrawn because, you know, I think that's the right route, at least for me.
But see, that's the distinction, is you're not saying I'm right and you're wrong. You're saying, for me, this is what worked. It's very different.
But, you know, I constantly disappoint people who assume that I am following all these events very closely. And you know what? I'm not. I have no plans to. And if you want to, please go ahead.
But that's a great choice too. It's where do you choose to get that I don't want to say it's a dopamine fix, but now Julia's got me fixed on that. Not the news. I don't want the news because it's going to frustrate me. It's going to frustrate me, and it's not necessarily the truth. Whatever the truth might be, it's not thought through. It's delivered for impact and influence.
All those things are absolutely true.
So this summer, we have been avoiding the news and instead watching on YouTube a show that we used to watch that we hadn't been able to find again called The Repair Shop. It's a British show where they work out of a building with a thatched hut, and it's a bunch of artisans that fix people's things. I gotta see that. That it is so, and there's no drama. They just, you know, here's Steve. Steve's going to take an hour and he's going to fix Julia's clock. And it's just it's just relaxing. The music is relaxing. Everybody's positive. It's just like a little commune of I'm gonna refurbish your antique. And at the end of the show, you know, they bring in, you know, here comes Julia to see this 200-year-old antique clock that she's never seen work, that her father always told her he was going to get fixed and didn't, and it works. And then the tears flow and everybody's happy. That's the fix I like, because then I feel good about that, and I don't feel stressed. I don't feel like, oh God, the world's coming down around me. I just want to feel good.
That's what our nervous systems need. I mean, that's what you need to withdraw healthfully and recover from any kind of an addiction, is a completely like no drama, no dopamine hit, just like being present, observing that processes take time. Like these things, that's really powerful.
I built a little Lego too.
Gardening.
Lego works the same way.
Lego. I like that. Cooking, gardening, building things. That's it. The rest of this is should not be, has gained way too much importance
Yeah.
than it should have, and it's gained that importance for what I believe are artificial reasons, so that people can make money and et cetera, et cetera.
Mishigas.
What's Mishigoth? Mishigoth.
Mishigas. It's Yiddish for craziness.
Yes, Mishigoths. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
I can sign
So
up
I
for
have
that.
a quick question, Steve. You teach
ma'am.
strategy.
Mhm.
So say a little bit more about that. What is teaching strategy about?
So technically, I teach both at the graduate and the undergraduate level, and I teach business strategy. Now, I don't have a ton of experience in business strategy, but the concepts are the same. I have a long history of military strategy, which is where business strategy evolves from. But they take all the students, the undergrads are all required to take a capstone strategic management class. Basically, can you manage a strategic process? But what is a strategic process? What does it look like? How does it work? Are you really going to manage it, or are you just going to be in the background as a new employee, which is far more likely? At the graduate level, it's much the same. So rather than just dive in and say, hey, we're going to look at the tropes of business strategy, and it is a trope-filled field. What's your value proposition? How do you work this blue ocean strategy thing, or you do this or that? It's like, no, you know what? Here's what strategy is about. It's about setting goals, pursuing those goals over time. So knowing that I'm going to move from point A to point B to pursue a goal, it's resourcing that effort and having a way to do it. So figuring out the ways to do it, and then dealing with the risks along the way, those obstacles that might come up. So, it's a series of building puzzles. And I do the same thing whether I teach it to grads or undergrads, is I start them off with a couple of personal case studies where we have Carmen set some personal goals, and they do some reading, and they start small. Let's just do a personal goal. You want to do something. And so with the undergrad, they typically say, hey, you want to be able to run a mile in 8 minutes, or 2 miles in 15 minutes, or something like that. How do you get there? And then I have them work through that. And then I have them expand that and then push further on beyond school. Okay, let's talk about life. Let's talk about jobs. Let's talk about financial security. Let's talk about the other things. And so what they do is they're exercising the tools that we'll use in business strategy, but in their personal lives. And then you build in the journaling so they can talk about the things they're concerned about. A lot of them want to learn how to deal with anxiety, so they set goals on dealing with anxiety, which is fascinating to me, because anxiety, there's only one way to deal with it, is just to confront it. But we go through that, and they learn to exercise the typical goals and objectives, resourcing, how you balance resources over time, all the different ways that you can get at something. How do you set milestones? How do you assess milestones? How do you measure your goals? How do you manage risk? Do you confront risk? Do you bypass risk? Do you mitigate risk somehow? What do you do to deal with that? All of that stuff comes in play. And then after they've done a couple of personal case studies, then I move them on to business. And they pick a business, and work through about 3 different case studies where you picked Apple and you want to do a complete analysis, internal, external, financial, personal, structural analysis of the company. So you understand how they work. Then you want to look at, okay, I have a goal. How are you going to measure those goals? And then their last one is, okay, come up with one wild ass goal, one crazy goal that you want to do, and then develop a strategy to pursue it. And I've had students decide to buy an airline. They're Southwest Airlines. They're going to acquire a European airline and apply their business model in Europe. I've had people turn Apple into a religion to take over the world. They can do whatever they want. They just have to have the analysis and the structure to be able to do so, and to be able to talk about it intelligently. Ultimately, none of these students, maybe 1 out of 50, will end up in a boardroom where they're actually going to lead a process. but give them the tools to be able to apply it in their personal lives. It's the same concepts.
Right.
And I think what happens is they retain the material better, but they also step out and they apply it in their personal lives. And I get notes. I love to get a note back from a student who says, hey, I showed up and I'm doing this and I'm doing that and I've improved here and this is better. And it's like, that's all I care about, is that you found a way to create we call those case studies building a better you, but you found a way to make your life better for you and those around you. And that's a win. That's a great educational milestone right there. And that's something you can take with you for the rest of your life.
Sounds great.
Oh, you're a phenomenal teacher, Steve.
I don't know about that. I sitting behind me, you can't see it. I've got a stack of boxes. So we do class activities too, and this is where I think I have the most fun. So we do an exercise early on where we go into critical and creative thinking. And speaking of Lego, we're going to try something. We're going to do speed building. There are 12 Lego car sets, all with about the same number of parts. You have all the pieces, you have the instructions, you get 30 minutes as a group to build a car. So how do you organize your team of 3 or 4 people, and how do you build the car? And then there's prizes on the back end. I do food tasting as we do assessment. So develop a system for evaluating food, how it's prepared, how it looks, how it tastes, how it smells, all those kinds of things. You develop your own system. It's an assessment system. And then I have military meals from all over the world that people have sent me to use.
I saw that somewhere in your LinkedIn thing. MRE tastings.
MRE tasting and
military meals ready to eat. MREs.
Yeah, it's fun, but we do stuff like that all semester long to tease out the little things that are important to know, but do it in a way that's productive and fun. And I have fun, they have fun, and it's a different class, right? I like to have students that come to my class that want to be there. And what I have found is I get more honor students that come to my class than come to the honors class for strategy. And it's a fun thing for me. It's a bragging thing for me, because then I get to tell the guy who teaches honors students, I get the real honor students, you get what's left over. They come to me because they know we're going to eat in class, that we're going to have grown-up discussions, that we're going to do all the life coaching things. I tell them on day one, you're going to get 16 weeks of business strategy that's actually life coaching disguised as business strategy.
It's just awesome.
It's great.
I have a blast doing it.
Of course.
It is beyond fun.
Yeah, it's part of the gardener mentality that you have. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it was fun to get to know you, Steve, and to have this conversation.
I sent you both LinkedIn requests too. Somehow I thought we were already connected, but
so we'll make that happen.
Well, and also thank you to Amelia Cohen-Levy who connected us.
Connecting us.
She's the best, isn't she?
She is. She is very, very swirly, which is a compliment. For me, that's
our story. Yeah, our story is crazy because I've never actually met her, and we were working on a book, and she reached out of the blue and said, "Hey, is there any way that I can be on this writing team that's putting together this book?" And I need a writer. I am anal retentive in the sense that when I've done 4 anthologies, and I have to have an equal mix of men and women. And then I hope that we get a good mix in there. I believe firmly that the more diverse the contributors, the better the end product. Right. And it always proves out that way. But Amelia was one that reached out to me, and then we have just stayed in touch. And there will come a time when I forget that I've never actually met her in person, and then I'll meet her in person, and I'll think that we've been friends for years. We've never met each other. That is so embarrassing, but it's the reality of my world that I continue to meet people that I've never met before.
Yeah, but you have met them. You've gotten to know them. You've exchanged ideas with them.
Yes. I agree. Like we're doing here. And if I see you in person, I'll feel like I've met you before because I have.
There you go.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. This is wonderful.
Yeah, we're
Thank
at
you.
time, so we want to be respectful and
I'm going to send you some parts.
aw, that's
Aw.
nice.